Do you have a Honda Jazz, but you need something a little bit bigger and a little bit more family friendly, something with a bit more ground clearance? Well, I have a proposition for you. Perhaps it's time to graduate to one of these, the Honda HR-V V-Turbo. And trust me, this thing, it's a bit of a rocket too. Now what we have here is the HR-V V-Turbo, and right now we are currently stuck in traffic. But we've also driven the HR-V out and about. We brought it to the provinces and we brought it in and around of town. And there are a couple of things I have to say about it. Now the 1.5 liter turbo in this V-Turbo, it's actually pretty strong. It's got about 175 horsepower and well over 200 Newton meters of torque. That's more than enough punch to get this car to 100 clicks in about 8.5–9 seconds. That's actually really good. And it's especially good if you consider the segment this thing competes in. Now, if traffic is as bad as it is now, it's still returning about 8.2, 8.3 kilometers per liter. That is not a bad showing at all. And if it's a little bit smoother, say, well, sort of normal traffic, it can still manage, well, about 9 kilometers per liter at less than 20 kilometers per hour. But, of course, I mentioned that we brought this thing out to the expressway, and at cruising speeds, this thing can manage about 20 kilometers per liter. 20! As for the drive, the ride is worth mentioning because it's firm, yes, but not uncomfortably so. When you run over sort of ripples on the road, it doesn't send shockwaves up your spine. Instead, it's sort of a smooth, supple feeling. You know that there's a bump on the road, but it doesn't make it feel like it's an uncomfortable experience. The suspension tuning on this is pretty impressive, especially when you consider that this thing has a rear torsion bar. As for steering, well, it's pretty light, it's pretty agreeable. And if you actually put this thing on eco mode, everything just lightens up. When you put it in sport mode, a little bit more weight is there, but that doesn't mean it becomes more tiring to drive. If anything, this thing is perhaps the furthest from being tiring to drive. It is that good. So let's say you're coming from a Honda Jazz, you're not going to have much complaints and you're going to have pretty minimal adjustments along the way. You're going to have to get used to the extra height, but for some people that's a pretty good thing. That's exactly what they look for in a car these days, the extra ride height, the extra visibility, because your seat is mounted a few inches higher off the ground. Now, power delivery, it's not going to be like one huge surge that you expect from like a big turbocharged engine. No, it's nothing like that. Instead, the HR-V Turbo surges forward. It won't exactly pin you to the back of the seats, but you just know the grunt is there, confidently pulling you along as you need to overtake a slower vehicle in front of you. Now, there's something I did notice about it was it feels more confident while it's on the go rather than you're coming from a standing start. So this one, when you mash the throttle, it starts off strong and then sort of trows going down, but the revs are still up there. It'll still keep pushing you forward. And then the VTEC kicks in, and then there's the extra boost. If you compare that to a Civic, the Civic will just keep on building up those revs and keep on boosting and whatnot. This is a bit mild compared to the Civic. The Civic RS in particular, well, they say it's more of a sports sedan, and I can sort of see where it's coming from there. Whereas this one, it's a bit tamer, but you know the performance is there. It's pretty good. That was the driving experience covered, but what about the place where you spend most of your time, which is right here in the driver's seat? Overall design, it is very aesthetically pleasing. Now, Honda calls this the Man Maximum Machine Minimum, or Honda speak for a more minimalist design. If you're coming from the previous generation HR-V, everything's been slimmed down, there are less aggressive angles and lines and curves in here. Instead, you get a flatter dash top, you get this interesting looking air conditioning vent housing, and you get a 2-layer dashboard. So we got the soft touch here, although right up here, it is hard plastic, and it goes the same for the dash top as well. But at least Honda made an effort with the touch points of the interior. Now for design, yes, it's more minimalist, and the result of that is you have the feeling of more space, more airiness in here. And it also helps that you have a huge windshield at the front. Brings in more light into the cabin. I also like the steering wheel design. Again, it's sort of retro Honda. You got this huge round horn button, and you got this pretty thick spot for your audio controls and your cruise control. Now, speaking of which, your audio controls, they're on the left-hand side and your cruise is on the right-hand side. So if you're coming from other Japanese cars, you're gonna get used to this pretty quickly. And speaking of other things you're gonna get used to quickly, look, it's got buttons and dials for your air conditioning controls. No more fiddling around with a touchpad. Why reinvent the wheel, right? Now here in the center, you have this sizable 8-inch screen. It's not a free-floating design per se, but I have to say it does look more neatly integrated compared to just sticking on an iPad right on top of the dash top. Now, if you've noticed, the buttons are on the right-hand side, which gives you an idea or a clue where this car was assembled. If you have to guess, it's Thailand, and the right-hand drive over there, so it's closer to their side. You've got your Apple CarPlay and your Android Auto, and to plug it in, you use the socket on this side, or the one with this sign, to be able to connect to your smartphone linking. This one, on the other hand, now that's simply for charging. So let's fiddle around the screen a little bit. So all you have to do is plug in your smartphone and just let Apple CarPlay or Android Auto do the rest of it. Now, cubby spaces. Now you have a 2-tier cubby space here. You have one right above and right below here by the gear selector. Your cup holders are actually a pretty decent size. And beside it are your drive mode systems. So with the V Turbo, you have a selection of Eco, Normal, and Sport. Now, if you want an even sportier arrangement, you're gonna have to get the RS for that. Now, interestingly, despite this being a 2-wheel drive crossover, and by the way, there are no all-wheel drive HRVs in the Philippine market, this still does have hill descent control. Now, that's something you usually find in 4x4s. So what's the purpose of hill descent control in this? Well, that's so you won't have to ride the brakes going down a steep ramp. All you have to do is press the button down here and set the speed with a toggle right here. Now, the lowest speed you can go with the hill descent control of a Honda is 3 kilometers per hour, and at the max is 20 kilometers per hour. So that should be more than enough going down a steep spiral parking basement. Other things about the HRV's front part of the interior, well, you're going to see this interesting AC vent right by the corners of the dashboard. So it's actually an air diffuser, and if you set it that way, instead of blowing air straight through the vent, it shoots it out through this rather neatly integrated air diffuser. So it blows out cool air, of course, and it blows it away from the windows so it doesn't fog up the windows, and at the same time, it doesn't freeze your hands to death because it's away from the usual AC vent. Of course, you can also set it to the standard vent or shut it off all the way. And another thing that captures Honda's essence of minimalism in this cabin is the design of the rear view mirror. So it's not totally frameless. There is a mini frame out here, but with the way it looks pretty slim. It's actually an auto dimming mirror, but I say it looks pretty neat, pretty wide actually. And it does remind me of older cars or retro cars. It's a great looking cabin here at the front. But if you move over to the back, Jazz owners are gonna enjoy it. Now, if you already own a Jazz or own the previous generation HRV, then you're probably familiar with the ULT seat. So what these do is, of course, they fold flat, but at the same time, you can also put the seat bottoms up and lock them into place, giving you loads of floor space back here. If you're a plant enthusiast, this thing's perfect for you. And put it down, just lift the tab, lock it into place. Now from the back seat, so there's a lot of space, although granted, I'm not exactly the tallest person in the world. But even then, there's loads of leg room and foot room here. However, because of the curvier shape of the exterior now, headroom isn't exactly its high watermark. See, I have about this much space left. So if you're taller than 5'3", you might find yourself brushing the headliner a little bit. And to make the most out of the space here, you're gonna have to slouch a little bit just so you have extra space. But thankfully, again, there's loads of legroom here. That's sort of a Honda thing. They really make the most out of that little space or a smaller footprint. Now, what about the other couple things in the back seats? Of course, you saw the armrest sort of flop into place. So got two decent sized cup holders back here. And you also have a smaller water bottle holder on the door as well. Of course, it won't exactly fit those tall hydro flasks, but if you have a baby hydro flask, then it'll be just fine here. And of course, if you want to feel a little bit chillier back here, the HRV thankfully has a pair of AC vents back here mounted on the center console. They are adjustable, you can swing them left or right, so there's maximum air for just about everyone in the cabin. Of course, there's also a neat little cubby holder down here, and you got your seat back pockets. There's actually 3 back here, so if you count this little one behind the driver's seat. And if you have a young family, they're gonna enjoy the space back here. And if you have to carry a child seat, the Isofix mounts don't have covers. So all you have to do is just slide it in and you're good to go. So that's the back seat covered. What about the cargo area? So over at the cargo area of the HRV, now this doesn't have a power tailgate, but that's fine by me, to be honest. So right, the cargo floor is actually a decent size. However, if you're going to compare it to something like a Toyota Corolla Cross, it's less than that. Now the cargo area itself isn't exactly class leading, and because of the sloping rear windshield, loading up taller items is going to be a bit of a struggle. A backpack fits in well, so does a mini bayong, and actually a weekend's worth of groceries will be just fine here. And if you're going to put a baby carriage, yeah, it is also going to fit here. However, some Tetris maneuvers are required. Also, if you've noticed, you have a cargo cover up here, so that keeps prying eyes away from your precious cargo. As for design, I personally like what Honda did to it, and especially if you look at the back end, got that long strip of light just slicing away the darkness. Very distinct looking. And you look at this very sleek looking tailgate and this low roof line, and yes, it does eat up into headroom, it does eat up into cargo space, but when you look at it as a whole, it does make the HRV look very handsome. And of course, let's not forget this, the hidden door handles, which has become an HRV trademark. Now moving on a little further ahead, of course you have the door mounted mirrors. Again, more Hondas are getting this look these days and makes it look a little bit cleaner. Got subtle lines going across from panel to door, more minimalist, more modern, and definitely a lot sleeker than before. And personally, again, the straight lines make it look bigger than it actually is. As for the front end, it looks much sportier than before. They got rid of all the rounded lines and the other weird looking angles, and the result is a sportier, slimmer, leaner looking HRV. I quite like it, and it complements that huge grille rather well. As for the lower end on the bumper, you're gonna notice the turbo models, well, they have a sort of lower down chin. That does eat into ground clearance. Still, it's not bad. You still have about 170 mils of ground clearance left. And if you look at the side, you have more than enough room to sort of wade through smaller floods. So to sum up, let's run through the pros and cons of the Honda HRV. And we really have to address the rear headroom thing. It's really not the best out there, and some of its competitors easily have much more than that. And the same goes for the cargo capacity. You're gonna have to do a little bit of Tetris to really maximize the space. Now, thankfully, we're gonna go to the pro side and mention the seating flexibility. So you have those ULTR seats, so you can flip up those seat bottoms and you can fit in taller items. That is something all of its competition doesn't have, and you have much more floor space for as long as you don't carry passengers at the back. So really, that's more of an expanded cargo area. Also, for power and economy, you kind of get the best of both worlds with this one, because despite having about 175 horsepower, you're still getting really good gas mileage on this, and it slots in somewhere in between sporty and comfortable. So it's really a Goldilocks car of sorts. And all of that economical, efficient packaging is wrapped up in a body that looks this handsome. Now, this HRV V Turbo starts at 1,650,000 pesos or thereabouts. And there's been a bit of a price increase mainly because of the current exchange rate scenario. So when it comes to value, it's not exactly a leader, but it slots in somewhere in between its other competition. If you're coming from a Jazz, you're able to save up a lot more, and you want something that goes faster than a Jazz or something faster than a small hatchback, the HR-V is definitely something you should consider, especially if you really don't need the added bulk of a mid-size SUV. So if we were to weigh all the compromises in terms of practicality and the overall package, I would give the HR-V an 8 out of 10.